So please join me in welcoming Garrett Epps to the National Archives.
Thank you for that generous introduction, and thank you to the Archives for inviting me here to be so near the actual Constitution. And thanks to everybody for taking their lunch hour to come out and listen to me talk. As Doug noted, this is the 226th anniversary of the U.S. Constitution, and I am reminded of an occasion on the 200th anniversary when The Nation magazine asked the novelist E.L. Doctorow to read the Constitution from start to finish and write up his reactions. Doctorow didn't enjoy the assignment. It is 5,000 words long, but reads like 50,000, he said. It lacks high rhetoric and shows not a trace of wit. It uses none of the tropes of literature to create empathetic states in the mind of the reader. Now, those of you who have read Doctorow's work know that he is one of our finest writers and understands American history very well. But on this occasion, I think he missed the story. For one thing, just the pedant in me has to say, he missed a third of the Constitution, which is 7,500 words long. Apparently quit when he got to the end of the original part, under the common American misconception that the amendments don't count. Even reading the 1787 document, he, I think, missed some truly high rhetoric, some literary tropes, and maybe not wit, but a certain amount of irony. Like Ed Doctorow, Americans love the Constitution. We know it is important, and we enjoy arguing about it. But for a lot of us, actually reading it is boring. We know it's important, but we aren't sure that the importance really lies in what's written down on the page. There's a meaning somehow other than that. And that is an American intellectual trait, because our country, which has given many wonderful gifts to the world, has never produced a painting of the caliber of Leonardo's Last Supper. We have, however, produced the Da Vinci Code. And the meaning there is that for Americans, if the Last Supper is simply an immortal, deeply human work of art depicting a central moment of the story of Jesus, boring. But if it has a secret message, and if that message is about a relatively obscure dynasty of Frankish kings that vanished from the earth 1,200 years ago, now you're talking. Now we have something really interesting. Never mind what the Last Supper is. A lot of Americans are more interested in what it means. Similarly, the meaning of the Constitution often seems to trump the Constitution itself. And that meaning we express in a term such as what the framers intended. That original intent is our national Da Vinci Code. Or to put it another way, I'm drawing on the 16 years I lived in the Pacific Northwest. Original intent is to the Constitution what Sasquatch is to the Cascade Mountains. Eagerly believed in, obsessively sought, relatively seldom actually seen. I teach constitutional law for a living, and a lot of people ask me, they come to me with concerns about one clause or another, and they ask, what did the framers intend? And they don't like my answer, because my answer is, they intended to write the words in that clause and have us interpret them. That just doesn't seem right. It doesn't sit well. To a lot of Americans, the words on the parchment seem less important than what the framers were thinking when they wrote them. If we knew those thoughts, then our present-day constitutional difficulties would vanish. The best-selling novelist William Martin wrote a Dan Brown-style thriller, in fact, entitled The Lost Constitution. The Lost Constitution is about a draft of the Constitution at Philadelphia that in a break, when the Washington says take 5 and the delegates are up and stretching, and then they start saying, hey, let's make some notes on this Constitution. So they, the publisher says that this draft is annotated by the Founding Fathers. The draft's marginal notes spell out in shocking detail the founders' unequivocal intentions, the unmistakable meaning of the Bill of Rights, peddled and purloined, trafficked and concealed for over 2 centuries. This lost Constitution could forever change Americans' history and its future. So the idea is that the words on that are upstairs in the parchment, those aren't clear. But if we could get hold of some other words that those same people wrote, that would make everything clear. Freedom of religion, state sovereignty, the right to bear arms. These other words are so powerful in the lost Constitution that people are willing to kill for them. And if we could just get our hands on these words, we would finally be able to read the words we do have. Original intent, original meaning, original understanding. Whatever you call this idea, it's worth asking why it's so important in our national dialogue. There is a history here. It is particularly American. We, the people, for the past 200 or 300 years, have had a more intense relationship with the Christian Bible than probably any other people in history. That biblical tradition is where the idea of original intent as something that can be discerned and known originated itself. Christians have been reading the Bible for nearly 2,000 years, but there have been many ways of reading it. Throughout Christian history, some have read it as an allegory of divine love. Some said that it was a set of parables, that they were to teach us how to live by reading these stories. Others said it was what's called an anagogy, which meant a key, hidden key to events in another world that could be understood only by those who had gained mystical access to God through meditation or divine grace. The idea that the Bible has a single literal intended meaning, and by which I mean a meaning available to, discernible by any literate believer without the need for priestly interpretation or mystical revelation, that in Christian terms is a relatively new idea. It gained primacy only during the Protestant Reformation. Jaroslav Pelikan, the great religious historian who taught at Yale for many years, wrote in 2004 that Luther and the other reformers believed that, quote, Scripture had to be not interpreted but delivered from interpretation to speak for itself. Pelikan continued that what mattered to Luther was, quote, the original intent and sensus literalis, meaning literal meaning of the words. And Pelikan saw, as I think perhaps you may, in Luther's Biblicism, a direct forebear of the way Americans interpret the Constitution. The general Protestant notion of original intent became even stronger in this country over the past century. It's almost exactly 100 years ago, between 1910 and 1915, a group of American evangelical theologians and scholars published a set of theological essays called The Fundamentals of Christian Belief. These very influential essays gave rise to the Christian movement we call fundamentalism in honor of this series of pamphlets. In large part, fundamentalism was a revolt against a certain style of Bible reading. against the 19th century scholarly movement we call the higher criticism. Higher critics were scholars of a kind we would all, I think, recognize